So, welcome everybody to the White Rabbit Podcast. Thank you for joining us. And notice, Alper, that I have not forgotten the name of the podcast.
Yes, I noticed that, yes.
Because I have been known to do that.
It happened a couple of times before.
It happened a couple of times before. I actually have it written down so that I can remember it. Or so I'm sure to not forget it. So, Alper, we have a guest on the podcast today,
yes.
Nick Richtsmeier. And Nick is the head of a strategy house in the U.S. called Culturecraft. So, Nick, say hi to everyone.
Hi, everybody.
And here's a little background on how I ran into Nick. I recently ran across Nick on LinkedIn, and initially I thought that I didn't already know him. But then I later realized that Nick is half of a podcast called Working Broken, or Working/Broken, which I listen to often and highly recommend. And the other half of that podcast, the other half of Working/Broken, is Brad Ferris. Brad is one of our favorite podcast guests. And I think, Alper, what is he? He's been on this podcast, I think it's three times so far, right?
Yeah, he holds the record.
Yeah, he holds the record. So it turns out that I had been following Nick for some time already. I just wasn't connecting the name to the face, or shall we say the face or the name to the voice. So anyway, Nick, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. And Nick, before we dive into our topic for today, help me wrap up this intro. Is there anything that you think our audience should know about you that I might have left out?
Oh, gosh. Well, I have been working in growth strategy and helping individuals and leaders and firms get where they're going for almost 20 years. I did it in-house and then did do it now on the consultant side. And for those in your U.S. contingent, I live in flyover country. I live in the middle of nowhere, quite willfully. And that, I think, in some ways provides some unique perspective on some of what we're talking about today. So
I'm just curious, how much nowhere are we talking about?
No, I live on the far end of Des Moines, which is one of the smaller cities in the middle of the country. So,
Okay.
And one more thing, Nick, if any of our audience members want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can obviously find me on LinkedIn. We're going to talk about LinkedIn today. And then probably the best place other than that is the newsletter site. So that's at editions.culturecraft.com. So editions like a newspaper edition.culturecraft.com.
Excellent. Thanks, Nick. And on to today's main topic. And first, before we get started, some background for our listeners, because this is, after all, a podcast about communication and presentation skills. So our listeners might be wondering, what does this have to do with any of that? Why are Matt and Alper even talking to this guy today? And the answer is this. Alper and I talk a lot on this podcast about the mindset of the audience, because we want the people up at the front of the room, the ones standing in front of the slides and talking to people. We want them to know what kind of milieu or what kind of environment they're speaking into. And, in other words, what's running through the minds of the audience. And a big part of that is long before your presentation actually starts, before your audience even walks into the room, before they even shake your hand, long before they even meet you. We're wondering, well, what kind of mindset are they being steeped in? Because these people are being steeped in a mindset, and we want to know what that is. So, and Nick thinks and talks a lot about how being bathed in the spirit of so-called social media is affecting people. So, Nick, perhaps riff on that for us a bit. And then Alper and I are going to ask some questions about what you say. So you tell me, Nick, what topic should we start out with?
Yeah, I think we can start where you left off, which is the idea of how, when you're in a presentational setting, you're in some ways immediately outside the norm of people's experience.
Okay.
Because you're face to face, and people's normal experience, the way they normally ingest personality, perspective, point of view, is in a digital format.
Okay.
Now we can wring our hands about that and wish for better days and all that kind of stuff, which I often do. But that is the reality, is the majority of the people in that room, their primary source for ingesting other people's ideas is digital.
Okay.
And increasingly, as the mass media has struggled and the news format sold out to the platforms, and then the platforms screwed them over, and all kinds of interesting things happen there. It's not just, finding out that your high school buddy got remarried for the third time. It's news. It's their sense of facts and information and all of that kind of stuff. And so that way of delivering information has not just inherent biases, but has an inherent information ecosystem of how it organizes information and how it delivers value and frames what's important. And so when you are speaking to people in a live setting, you're breaking the trend of what's normal for them just by virtue of the setting that you're in.
Nice.
Which in a way that wasn't true, I would say, even maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
So for your folks who have been public speaking for a long time, right, the floor has been moving underneath them.
Okay. And you mentioned that the audience, that their primary way of consuming ideas or thinking about ideas and running into ideas and meeting people is virtual. And one thing that we've talked about here on this podcast is breaking patterns. And, if you can break a pattern, then you have somebody's attention, at least, for a few seconds until you bore them again, or hopefully you don't bore them again. But if you bore them again, at least you have their attention for a few seconds. And that is usually a pretty good opportunity. But the thing that you're talking about here, that you're breaking the patterns because they're used to running into people online, and then all of a sudden here's somebody in person. Is this a good thing, or is this a bad thing, or is this an opportunity, or what?
I mean, I think there's an opportunity there. I don't know that there's necessarily good or bad. I think where it becomes good or bad is your awareness of it and your ability to manage it. So in the sense of, the value of pattern breaking as a presenter and as someone who's in front of a room, I think there's an upside there because you are definitionally pattern breaking, but you're also working against a bias that all of us, I shouldn't say we, all of us on this call included, have been trained into.
Okay.
And that training has gotten much more aggressive in the last 3 to 5 years. And so the classic sort of boiling frog scenario, we are well boiled at this point.
Yeah.
And so for speakers, again, you have to think about your audience is probably not deeply engaged in long form thinking.
Okay.
Or if they are, it's only very sparingly. They exist in an echo chamber. Everyone you talk to today exists in a well-defined echo chamber. We can all go, oh, I don't want an echo chamber. I want diverse ideas, and I go to such and such platform. All the platforms are designed to protect you from ideas that would make you click away. And so because you're being protected from ideas to make you click away, we're all being insulated to be sort of little idea babies that can't handle anything that ruffles our little feathers, right? So there is I tend to be contrarian in my thinking and styles. I love contrarian thinking, but you have to be careful with contrarian because people aren't used to it. They've been conditioned against it in a digital environment, and so that's again another place where there's both opportunities and pitfalls.
Okay. And another subject that you have talked about is trust, and that being steeped in this social media mindset is, I think you've talked about eroding trust, right?
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, I mean. Hank Green, was one of the early guys on YouTube, has had huge success on YouTube. You may know his brother, John Green. They're both famous authors. Hank Green did an interesting piece not that long ago on YouTube, and I steal this phrase from him all the time. He calls the internet is a trust-destroying machine.
Interesting.
And
Good
and
phrase.
so you think about how much we engage with internet mediated information. So that in some way the information came to us through the lens of the internet. That machine is systematically teaching us to distrust.
Okay.
It's teaching us to question the source. It's teaching, we're being fed sort of not contrarian in a different information sense, but in a like, hey, is that really true? Is that really this? Is that really that? Right? All of that kind of, that entire world that riffed off of the early 2000s and this sort of pseudo business material of like, hey, you think it works like this, but actually it works like this.
Yeah.
The internet is built on that now. And so you look at the line of institutions, right? Government, education, healthcare, big business, religion, all the major institutions are in a cyclical 20-30% decline in terms of trust.
Okay.
The only exception is the military. So if you're a public speaker who's in the military, you automatically win.
Hang on a second. Back up there a second. How does this happen in the military? What's going on there?
Yeah, I don't have the research on that. It's just they are by far the outlier. The military has been on a cyclical rise over the last 20 or 30 years. That may be my gut suspicion, with absolutely no data to support it, is there's been a quite heavy-handed propaganda in the U.S. from both political parties. Most political parties have a vested interest in being pro-military, and so I think that helps, but I'm not sure if that's all of it. But you
they
got
also haven't flunked as massively as the other institutions that you mentioned.
Yeah. So the question is every institution other than the military dramatically less trustworthy than it was 25 years ago, by definition? Are they all more evil and more manipulative and more? No, of course not. That's insane.
Yeah.
So what it means is we all put on 20% less trustworthy glasses 25 years ago. Well, what were the glasses? What was the internet?
Yeah. Ooh,
right?
Yeah.
So we've been watching the world through distrustful lenses for 20, 25, particularly and increasingly so in the last 10 or 15 years. And so we're all just walking around kind of cynicism machines. And so for your speakers, I think there's a burden of proof that didn't exist, again, even 10 years ago.
Okay.
And that burden of proof is not necessarily throw facts at me because no one believes facts anymore. That burden of proof isn't necessarily list your credentials because all institutions are fake, so your credentials are fake, right? That burden of proof is a feeling. And because we've all been socialized on the internet where all our feelings are being massaged all the time. And so as a public speaker, you have to have that skill of, can you make me believe you in the first 3 to 5 minutes? And I think 5 is probably long.
Yeah.
Can you make me believe you in the first 3 minutes? And if you can't make me believe you, then I'm probably zoned out in a way that's very difficult to come back.
Okay. And let's stay on this point for a second. You mentioned that the internet, what did you call it? A
Trust-destroying machine. Yeah.
Trust-destroying machine. So let's stay on the topic a little bit longer. So tell us more about this, and why do you think is the internet a trust-destroying machine?
Well, I think there's good research on this. I don't have all of the sources in front of me, but some of it is that it was built that way.
Okay.
That you look at some of the players who were actively involved in designing the social web in the 2000s, going into the 2010s, and they have enormous ideological biases. You read their writing, you see what they speak about, and they have incredible financial vested interests in undermining people's trust in major institutions.
Okay.
You use the example of the news, right? So the news online started with kind of scraping sites like Huffington Post. Huffington Post would come in and basically cut and paste the articles off the New York Times or off of Forbes or whatever, pay them $0. Forbes and the New York Times waved their hands dramatically and said, "This is our stuff," but didn't do anything about it. Didn't make Huffington Post pay for it. And a deal was brokered, essentially, and you can read all this in Ben Smith's book Traffic, which is an excellent book. deal is brokered that basically says, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to steal all your stuff, but then we're going to send you this magical thing called traffic.
Yeah.
And with traffic, you can make money, right? And so all the major news media agencies went, oh, okay. But then what was happening on the aggregator sites, on Huffington Post, on God, all the news or the various sites or names are escaping me, but on all these sites is then the news articles don't just come as news articles, right? They come as, is this true? So and so says this, right? The headlines start shifting. There's a companion article going, that can't possibly be right, right? And all of a sudden, the people who build the internet start to realize, if you really want people to click, you trigger their cynicism. If you really that the thing that makes movement on the internet, quick reactivity, quick clickability, is deep feeling.
Okay.
And the feelings that we are more reactive to are negative ones. So all of that goes back to like the Kahneman material and behavior economics and all of these kind of things that have been studied for 25 years that, like one example from the Kahneman material is loss aversion, right? That the level of happy you are by gaining 10% is a tiny minuscule of the level of sad you are by losing 10%.
Yeah.
We're way more reactive to negative feelings. And so the algorithms are all built to just supposedly indiscriminately do just, hey, whatever people are reacting to, that must be the right thing. And well, what are people going to react to? Negativity, distrust, fear, anger, cynicism, right? This is how simultaneously Facebook can dramatically skew an election while simultaneously saying we didn't do it on purpose. They kind of didn't do it on purpose. They just built a system that's perfectly designed for a certain kind of campaign.
Yeah. So but before I throw it over to Alper for some questions, Nick, I have one more question for you, and that is that you've talked about a concept called, I think you call it radical trust. Did I get that phrase right? Radical trust?
I say a lot of phrases. Maybe dig a little farther.
So anyway, you've talked about I think you've talked about the need to have, to counter this with unusual amounts of trust. That one of the ways that you can counter this system is by having more trust in the world around you. Is that a correct way to sum it up?
Yeah. So
yeah.
The old traffic system would tell you, well, the way to fix this is to wave your hands and tell people how trustworthy you are, right?
Okay.
So I mentioned, you have to prove your trustworthiness in the first 3 to 5 minutes, right? And people's instinct in that is, again, to do credentials, to tell a story about how much someone loved them, or to do some sort of backhanded way of, look, you can believe me, I know what I'm talking about. And the difference is that's actually not how human brains work.
Okay.
How human brains work is we tend to believe in people who believe in us.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the thing that breaks the system, that's a little bit hard to do digitally, but it's incredibly powerful to do live.
Yeah.
Is to trust your audience.
Yeah.
And to show as quickly as possible that you believe. Don't say I believe in you. That's ridiculous. But to show that you have enormous confidence in these people, that you're not just here to give them the sound bites and to check a box and to take your paycheck and go home, but that you have such enormous belief in the people that you've been given the gift of time in front of, that you're going to give them all that you can. That's why vulnerability is such a powerful tool, is because when I can show up and show that I'm accessible and vulnerable in a way that's meaningful, what I communicate to the audience is I trust you.
Okay.
I'm going to give myself to you in ways that puts me at risk.
Interesting. Okay. And so how are you doing, Alper? Do you have questions at this point for Nick?
I have been taking notes since the beginning. I think we can run into the 3-hour limit on this episode. But yeah, there are a couple of things that I want to throw at Nick's way.
Excellent. Go for it.
Nick, I really enjoyed listening to you. And I loved the moment when you said the burden of proof, because I think before the internet, before the digital age, let's say, and less limited to the news outlets, the burden of proof lay with the journalists. So it was a journalist's job to make sure that what he or she was talking about was accurate. And I remember back in the day, if you published a story on air, on TV, or in a newspaper, it was a pretty huge deal to retract that if something went wrong and you realize that there was something wrong with the information that you provided.
Absolutely.
Not the case anymore, because Absolutely. I think right now the burden of proof is completely thrown out of the window, and I as a person can go online, and if I push the right buttons in the right people, I'm going to gather an audience and claim whatever truth I want to claim. And the fact that I can do it with the dramatic music in the background, with a dramatic voiceover, immediately turns it into a documentary that people can take around and claim to be truth. So my question to you is this, and for the sake of the podcast, I'm going to limit it to the presentation scenarios. How, as a presenter, can we be prepared for that? Because here is a hypothetical scenario. You go up there to speak on topic A. Let's say the globe is round. And then somebody comes up and says, well, I saw this documentary which was published by this and this, which had the adequate music and the adequate dramatic voiceover, which was proving that the earth was flat.
Yeah.
Let's say on any kind of topic, you find yourself as a presenter in front of such a situation. Do you have any ideas how to deal with that or how to prepare for that in advance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it obviously depends on if you're in a more like Q&A scenario where someone could actually say those words, or if you're just trying to prepare for that mindset. So I'll handle both versions.
Okay.
I think if you're just dealing with the mindset, which everybody should be planning for that kind of a mindset, then you have to think about what are the priors of the people I'm in front of? What's their data, what's their media diet? What types of information are they tend to be streamed from? Now, it's going to be broad, but again, oftentimes you're in you're in front of companies or you're in front of industry groups or something, and they have a certain kind of media diet, right? Or at least a large proportion of them will be. So that you should have as much as you can, and the price that you're being compensated with is worthy of the time. You should have a sense of what's the likelihood that they're going to receive what I'm going to say as factual, as counterfactual, as an innovation, as standard news, right? You have to, in terms of your audience preparation, now you're not just preparing your standard kind of who's my audience and et cetera. You're preparing yourself for their echo chamber. I tell people about this online too, is you have to think about when you're writing a newsletter or you're building a website or whatever you're doing, you have to think about which echo chamber am I going to speak to, because you have to pick one.
Interesting.
So I think planning for those priors is really important, because what you going in, you have to understand that it like you said, you could be saying something that to you is as self-evident as the world is round. Every piece of information now is received as opinion. So that's just, again, how the system has conditioned us. Well, that's your opinion. I'm doing my own research, yada, yada, yada. And so you can't go in a way that you maybe would have done a presentation 10 years ago. Well, here's the things that we all know, right? Here's our 10 facts that we're working off of. And based on these 10 facts, I'm going to make this big case of how that sort of doctoral thesis delivered passionately is not, this can't be the structure most of the time. Again, some audiences, if you're speaking in front of a more scientific sort of organization, so you can deal with those kind of things, or analytical organization. But you have to understand that no matter what you say, people are going to experience it as opinion.
Yes.
And so what I try to do in that scenario is show up accepting that some of you are going to have other opinions. And I usually try to put it out first. I try to put out the counterfactual first and say, some people think the world is flat. Some of you might think the world is flat. And you are welcome to that opinion. In this conversation, we're going to start from the premise that the world is round. If you can't accept that premise, there's really good snacks out in the lobby, right? Like, if you have a premise that is pretty fundamental and you don't feel the need to argue for it, I think you just let people know, particularly if you think it's at risk from a prior standpoint. Now, really quickly, you mentioned if there's an interplay. If there's a back and forth and the Q&A comes up and says, hey, you said the world is round and I watched a video on YouTube and it says the world is flat, what do you say to that? Then I think every speaker should have their own version of my little hey, the internet taught you that everything is opinion, and so I know I'm never going to change your mind. So I don't have any interest in changing your mind. I think some people in this room are open to maximizing the benefits of the world being round. And that's what this conversation is about. I don't begrudge you if you're not interested in those benefits. Maybe there are benefits to thinking the world is flat, and you should give that presentation. But that's not my presentation.
These are such strong words that I'm going to use them word by word, except the flat earth and the round world. But for me, they're solid gold. And I like how they introduce, at least in my mind, and which we will talk about in future episodes or in other articles that we share, these three things: the priors, the media diet, which was one of my favorites, and the echo chamber that the audience is coming from. I think up until this point, we were like, okay, what kind of lives do they have? What do they want in life? What does their goals look? What do their goals look like? What now? We're bringing so many new parameters into the conversation, and I love hearing them from you.
And I guess I just want to acknowledge that those two things are Venn diagrams, right? We still want to know those things. You just have to understand that in most cases, what we want out of life is being fed. So, for example, you survey the average business executive between the ages of 28 and 40. Somewhere in their priorities is sort of like superhero level, look great without a shirt on, physical fitness. Right? We're not just talking about like health and I want to be well and blah, blah, blah. We're talking about pecs and abs and biceps and the whole thing, right? They have their own way of saying it and they have their own supplementation plan for it, but somewhere it's in the things that's important to them. Well, why is that? Well, why? And what does that have to do with the echo chamber they're in, right? What is the Venn diagram of a kind of bro culture, hyper masculinity echo chamber and a certain relationship to, for example, scientific fact? There is a relationship. If I'm speaking in that environment, I probably should know a little bit about that, right? So again, it is about finding out what they care about and what their priorities are and whatever. It's just unfortunately, because the way we've designed the world and the way we've organized it, none of us are waking up in the morning and coming up with that on our own. We're letting the little black boxes tell us what they are.
Yeah. And this is purely coincidental, but do you follow John Oliver's The Last Week?
I watch it off and on, so if it's a particular episode, I may not have seen it.
The latest one actually is called The AI Slop, Last Week Tonight.
Yeah.
And it was talking about how detailed and realistic creation of fake news or fake videos and fake things have become. So I think it's going to become even more challenging in the future to establish this kind of trust, especially if someone is coming from that kind of an echo chamber where it has been supported by high definition 4K realistic looking videos. Yeah.
I think it was just, it's a different conversation for a different time, but we may be at the peak of this because I think we are crossing a threshold where so much of the digital world is manufactured and everybody knows it's manufactured, but they don't know which part of it's manufactured, that the internet may actually break its own ability to break our trust, right? Because all of a sudden it's just like the internet by definition is false. It's so manufactured. There's so much AI. There's so much alternate reality that you're starting to see the inklings, and I don't know where this is going to go, but you're starting to see the inklings of a larger and larger population, not just conspiracy theory people like me, who are going, oh, I don't even know if I can trust any of this.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like my now again, they live in my household, so they're influenced. But my 14-year-old son said to me the other day about, I forget what the topic was, something, and he rolled his eyes and he goes, well, why would they believe that? They saw it on the internet. His immediate perspective is, if it's on the internet, it must not be true.
So we have maybe crossed that point already.
Yeah, again, I think my kids are probably at the end of a bell curve because they live with me, right? But I don't think they're alone in the shift in that perspective.
Yeah. Have you, and this is just out of curiosity, have you found yourself a victim to that lately or recently?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have to check my priors all the time, right? So I consume my own religion. So I go, okay, wait a second. I step back and I go, okay, what am I ingesting and where am I ingesting it from? And how might that impact my ability to understand this situation? And then I go one of two paths. One path is, oh, this is a really important topic for me, and so I'm willing to engage other sources that are going to have their own bias, and that bias is probably going to irritate me, right? Because I've been conditioned to hate that other bias. But if it's important to me, I got to go do that, right? I got to go read the competing literature. Or I go, oh, I am in an echo chamber on this. I don't care that much about it. I'm being conditioned to care about it, and I'm going to stop reading about it because I just don't want to just become a guy with a really strong opinion about something I know nothing about, right? And that is something I probably have to do once a day. That level of checking myself so that I'm not just an amalgam of the sources that are conditioning me to be on their team.
Yeah. And in the last episode, Matt and I talked about how to be able to say no more gracefully and better. I think it will be a skill that will come hand in hand in terms of creating that trust in the audience, especially if what we talk about can be contrarian to their own echo chamber or their own media diet.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
Nick, I have one more question for you before we wrap up, and that is just to kind of confirm what you meant by something. A few minutes ago, you were talking about a Venn diagram, and I was wondering, what are the circles of the Venn diagram? It's like, okay, one circle is I want washboard abs and big pecs. What are the circles of the Venn diagram?
Sorry, sometimes I barrel through topics and don't. The whole conversation's in my head. I don't know why you didn't get it.
And it's on the internet, Matt. Come on.
Exactly. So we're shorthanding all these things. The first Venn diagram was a reference to, again, I have not listened to all of your episodes, but what I'm assuming is some of the coaching you've given to people, which is how to know your audience, right? Their preferences, their goals, their priorities, things like that. Sort of that natural kind of audience awareness circle. Right.
Yeah.
And then in this conversation, I was arguing for a different circle, which is you got to know their media diet, their echo chamber, those kind of things. And what I was trying to say is that's the Venn diagram, that the media diet and the echo chamber and their preferences overlap.
Okay.
Right?
Interesting.
Because their preferences are being conditioned to them by the media diet.
Okay.
And now that's always true. We've been surrounded by, advertising for 70, 80, 90 years. But we are getting 10,000 times more advertising per day than we were in the 1960s and 70s. And all content is advertising. And we're not actually reading advertising, but we're being advertised a way of life, a value system, et cetera. So that Venn diagram, meaning if I was listening to this podcast, I'd be like, gosh, it's just one more thing I have to know. I have to know their preferences. I have to know their wants. I have to know whatever. And now this lunatic guy's telling me I got to do media diet and all this kind of stuff. So what I was trying to say is, listen, if you learn media diet, if you know your audience's media diet and you know their echo chamber and you know their priors, you're going to be a long way downfield to knowing their preferences and knowing their values, because for better or worse, they were fed those things by the echo chamber they're in. I shouldn't say they, it's us too.
What if you find yourself in a situation where your position is completely in opposition to that?
As the speaker, I hope that they're paying you a lot of money. I think then you make a choice, right? You make a choice to, do I want to do the extra work to try and earn the trust of this contrarian audience? And that's going to be a lot of work. And it isn't having more data and having your charts more lined up and whatever. It's going to be marinating yourself in their worldview and seeing if you can get somewhere toward your point from the starting point of their worldview. That's a lot of work. Maybe it's worth it. Maybe you care enough about your topic that it's worth it. It's not just a financial thing.
Yeah.
The other option is, you're an experienced speaker. You know what you're doing. You get up there and you give your speech to a dead room, and you take your check and you go have a nice steak dinner. I mean, that's really the other option. I think anything in the middle ground there is real miserable. So I think you kind of got to pick which of those directions you're going to go.
Yeah, that's a good answer. Because things will get messy. Things will get messy. And you wouldn't want to find yourself in a situation in which you're not fairly compensated, but doing much more work than previously you thought. And it should be worth it.
Yeah.
This thing that Nick is describing, which is basically you're Earth is round kind of guy, and you're standing in front of an audience that is the Earth is flat, man, and you've got to give a presentation on how the Earth is round. That's you. Yeah, you're right. Your paycheck better be pretty big for that. Good
As
luck
part
to you.
of a project the other day, a client of mine gave me a presentation as to why the Earth is flat. It had some interesting points.
Wait. Are you serious that somebody gave you a presentation that said the Earth is flat?
That was the homework that I gave them, because I was going to pretend to be the difficult audience, and I was. But I must say, he researched some pretty compelling arguments.
Wow.
With visuals, of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've got to wrap it up here. So we could keep you around here for hours, Nick. But thanks for coming on, and we got to wrap up at some point. So thank you, Nick. And before we sign off, Alper, do you have any more questions for Nick?
No questions, but a huge thanks for the post that you published on LinkedIn several weeks ago, which crossed my path with you, and I really enjoyed it. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Excellent. So to our audience members, thank you very much for tuning in, and Alper and I will see you again in the next episode.
Yeah, take care.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.